When I think of our global future, I'm a little bit afraid. It feels like we narrow our perspective to protect our self-interest and justify what we think we already know. It's so much easier to protect that squishy, vulnerable part of ourselves than to be open to new ideas and perspectives, even when it would benefit ourselves or our communities. We are a world full of complicated people with complex individual stories. But the stories we hear aren't always representative of the truth. When I think of the stories that I'm exposed to, I think of my mom's NPR podcast, or the latest Twitter headline, or that supposedly really important political event that my friend told me about last week. But what if these stories aren't complete? As youth, we are our world's future. But what if we never challenge ourselves to see the full story? How are we expected to become the world's future leaders if we never challenge ourselves to see the truth? In our growingly connected world, there is a need for global leaders that are able to recognize a story beyond themselves. From solving problems greater than Bainbridge Island, greater than Washington State, greater than the United States, we benefit from being able to understand and empathize across communities. Connecting across continents, borders, and communities, we are able to see that our own perspective isn't the only perspective. By holding a global perspective as youth, we can become better, kinder leaders for the future. Building a global perspective can happen in lots of different ways. You can travel. You can take classes with a global connection. There are exchange programs. You can learn another language. You can read various sources of the news. But your global perspective can also come from something so simple, but so powerful as building friendships. BOSIA, the Bainbridge Ometepe Sister Island Association, connects youth from Bainbridge to the communities of Ometepe, Nicaragua, in order to foster deep relationships between people. One of BOSIA's core elements is its engagement with youth. Ometepe is a figure 8-shaped island located in Lake Nicaragua, which is just north of the Costa Rican border. As an international organization, BOSIA holds a unique position. Although it provides services to Ometepe, such as scholarships and programs for special needs youth, it is first and foremost about the friendships between people. Now, engaging youth in global affairs doesn't have to mean flying across the world to build houses or dig wells. It can happen in your own hometown, from the moment you're old enough to have someone read you a book or draw your first pictures. Kids from Wilkes Elementary, Ordway Elementary, and the Island School have been creating Kids Can Make a Difference calendars for BOSIA for the past 23 years. These calendars frequently feature the drawings and descriptions of plants and animals on Bainbridge and Ometepe. You may have seen them sold outside of local businesses, or maybe you own one yourself. The kids making these calendars are learning that their actions, the funds they raise through calendar sales, directly impact the people in other communities, even if they've never actually met. This connects youth to a world that's greater than themselves. It's the beginning of a global education. Later, high schoolers continue their global education by traveling to Ometepe as part of BOSIA's annual student delegation. Oftentimes, the high schoolers traveling to Ometepe were introduced to Ometepe as elementary students. In many ways, the student delegation can be thought of as the soul of the organization. The connections built between the youth of Bainbridge and the communities of Ometepe form the building blocks of BOSIA's mission to create meaningful, respectful relationships between our two communities. By living with an Ometepe family, the student from Bainbridge gets the opportunity to permanently change their worldview. This exposes them to a life that they otherwise may struggle to conceptualize. These experiences cut down our preconceived assumptions of what others are like and reminds us of how we are all human. Recognizing our universal similarities is an essential quality for our future global leaders. As an elementary school calendar kid, board member, and student delegate for BOSIA, I have had the opportunity to look outside myself and envision a world where I am part of a global community. Now is an essential time to talk about the importance of a global perspective in youth. In 1986, BOSIA was founded with the intent to build a relationship between our two communities despite our opposing governments during the Contra War. In the simplest terms, the Contra War was a conflict between Nicaragua's US-backed conservative government and Nicaragua's liberal party, the Sandinistas. Now, as Nicaragua is again an internal political conflict, we are reminded of the importance of maintaining our global communities and perspectives. Even if you're not highly involved in global politics, a global perception still matters. Take a look at these photos with me. At least to me, the image on the left looks really familiar. It's the map that I've seen in most of my classes since I was little. Imagine my surprise when I found out our world doesn't actually look like this. The map on the left greatly exaggerates the proportional size of North America and Europe. In comparison, the map on the right is far more accurate. Of course, size isn't everything, but it does affect our perceptions. If we are raised to be uninformed about something as simple as basic geography, imagine what else we are ignorant to. When faced with information, such as the incorrect map, we need to be looking and challenging at what we see in order to better understand our world's realities. That fight against ignorance, or what we think we already know, is instrumental to bettering our world. Conflicts, like rising white nationalism or backlash against immigration, aren't coming from more hate, but rather less understanding. Whenever we are faced with conflict, we are at risk of losing our greater perspective. It's tempting to think that the world is neatly made up into us and others, when realistically we know this isn't true, because we're all stuck on the same planet together. And as youth, it is particularly important that we have this global understanding. As youth, we are our world's future, and we have a duty, a responsibility to be making the world a better place. But how do we do that? How do we be global citizens? Part of becoming a global citizen involves reframing how we think about relationships. Something that I have learned through working with BOSIA, and that is really important for me to share with you, is that there is a better way to have a global relationship. Sometimes when we talk about performing service or bettering our global communities, we slip into a patronizing mindset of, oh, poor them. Why doesn't somebody help them? By thinking like this, we disengage our global mindset. An example of why this kind of thinking doesn't work and should be avoided is the former ambulance project by BOSIA. It's a short story, and it goes like this. BOSIA representatives received an ambulance via donation. They contacted medical staff on Ometepe and asked if they would like an ambulance. Of course, they said yes, but there was a problem. The ambulance wasn't ever able to run effectively on Ometepe. Gas was too expensive, and there weren't enough paved roads. Whenever I hear this story, I'm always struck by how good intentions, without a greater perspective, can sometimes fall short. With this story, I want to make a really clear distinction. There is a difference between doing service for others and doing service with others. Global change needs to come from connecting with people rather than preachy charity. We can't assume that we know what others need, and we also have to recognize that our efforts to help aren't always empowering or even helpful. And that's where our global perspective comes into play. We as people on Bainbridge Island, we as US citizens, we as youth in action, need to know that we're not the fixers of the world. We can't assume that we're better because we have ambulances that run, or whatever else might mark societal success. To be a global citizen, we must connect through meaningful long-term relationship building. In the end, my call to you is to be that global citizen. To be youth in action, we must be global citizens. Think critically, but with empathy. Open up your global perspective. I'm not saying all our world's problems can be solved by being more compassionate, aware people, but also why not? If first graders can make a difference through something as simple as calendars, then so can you. Thank you.